challenge in my position to set out at this point and see if I couldn't make myself a good man.
JFK Jr. was widely known to be planning to run for office, most likely for Senate in November of 2000. The CIA and the Mossad couldn't let him anywhere near elected office because he would obviously make it his unyielding mission to uncover the full truth about the assassinations of his uncle and his father. JFK Jr. published an issue of George magazine focused on analyzing conspiracies. One of the stories Kennedy published indicated an Israeli intelligence role in the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli prime minister who had softened his attitude toward the Palestinians. Netanyahu also had played an obvious and very public role in the Rabin assassination. The Mossad could not tolerate a high-profile Kennedy digging up dirt on Israel, which, if it had been exposed at that time, could possibly have caused a near disintegration of Israeli society.
4 eyewitnesses at Caldwell Airport saw former President George H.W. Bush and his son, Texas Governor George W. Bush, with 2 members of the Mossad, Michael Harari and General Raphael Elton, the day before the tragic flight.
Good evening. Divers today found the bodies of John Kennedy, his wife, and her sister in the wreckage of his plane at the bottom of the ocean off Martha's Vineyard. In a day of fast-breaking developments, recovery teams got to work retrieving remains and wreckage. A memorial mass was set for Friday in New York. The President and the First Lady will be there. And the Kennedy family made plans for a possible burial at sea.
Less than 2 months before the JFK Jr. assassination, CBS, which is a CIA and Zionist affiliate, published a story about his father's coffin being dumped at sea, which was likely predictive programming and an announcement about what they planned to do to JFK Jr. The humiliation ritual was clear in the claim that Bobby Kennedy wanted his brother's coffin dumped at sea, and Bobby would have wanted to retain all physical evidence related to the crime in order to eventually prove that there was, in fact, a vast conspiracy.
In the next instant, with this time Mrs. Kennedy apparently looking on, a second shot, the third total shot, hit the President's head. His head could be seen to move violently forward.
We will know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false, CIA Director William Casey said in February 1981.
We talked for a long time on the phone, about 2 weeks before he died. I said, "You remember that conversation we had about being a good man?" And he said, "Of course, I think about it a lot." And I said, "Well, I just want you to know that you have wildly, spectacularly achieved that objective. I mean, you are as good a man as I know. You are as clear a case of what I consider to be virtue in an adult male that I can think of."
The cabal had to take him out, both to keep the secrets of their past crimes hidden and make sure JFK Jr. was not in a position of power to disrupt future crimes, such as 9/11.
What happened in 1977 was that Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Shamir, the former heads of the Zionist terrorist gang, the Irgun, and Lehi, the Stern gang, these 2 parties had created a coalition of all their former terrorist buddies, and Netanyahu's in there, the revisionist Zionists. They came to power in Israel, and this is when the plan for 9/11 began. Menachem Begin is known as the father of terrorism. He's the founder of the Likud party. He was born in Russia, came to Palestine in 1942, became leader of the Irgun in 1944, which was a terrorist group, bombed the King David Hotel, killing 93 people, British headquarters in 1946, then was involved in the massacre of the Deir Yassin village, which was meant to scare the Palestinians to fleeing, which many did. And he created the Likud party in 1973, became prime minister in 1977, and promptly invaded Lebanon in 1978. This is the emblem of the Irgun, which he was the head of. It's a Jewish terrorist group, and it's connected to the Netanyahu family because Mr. Netanyahu's father was the director of this movement, the Irgun, the new Zionist organization, since 1940. Here is both Mr. Begin and Netanyahu. These men are cut from the same cloth. This is the group that they belong to, the great group that they have allegiance to is a group of terrorists. In 1974, a British journalist asked Mr. Begin, he said, how does it feel in the light of all that's going on to be seen as the father of terrorism in the Middle East? And Begin said, in the Middle East? He said, in all the world. So he put on himself the mantle of being the father of terrorism in all the world. And in 1979, this man, Bibi Netanyahu, he had been working in Boston for a Rothschild company called Boston Consulting Group. He went back, this is his father, and they started something called the Netanyahu Institute, in which they began promoting the idea of terrorism being the scourge that the West has to fight. And they had a conference in 1979 called the Jerusalem Conference on International Terrorism. And George Bush spoke at the conference and spoke in support of this preemptive strikes against nations that are supporting terrorism.
On September 23, 1979, less than 3 months after the Jerusalem Conference, which was actually the International Conference of Terrorism, Israel's founding spy master and former Mossad chief Isser Harel predicted that Arabs would attack the tallest building in New York City.
He made that prediction to this man, Michael Evans, a Zionist Jewish Christian evangelist from Texas. That was 22 years before 9/11. Mr. Evans said, do you think that terrorism will come to America? And if so, where and why? Now, this is 1979. Harel said, I fear it will come to you in America. America has the power but not the will to fight terrorism. As to the where, Harel said, New York City is a symbol of freedom and capitalism. It's likely they will strike the Empire State Building, your tallest building, and symbol of your power. He pretended to be ignorant about the tallest building.
Following the conference, Benjamin Netanyahu made a career promoting the so-called war on terrorism, and he somehow also predicted 9/11.
I wrote a book in 1995, and I said that if the West doesn't wake up to the suicidal nature of militant Islam, the next thing you'll see is the militant Islam is bringing down the World Trade Center.
9/11 was a false flag terror atrocity that was designed to instill fear and rage in the American population, so that we would accept and we would get behind this war on terror. And I have to say, it succeeded very well.
I have had long conversations over the past 2 weeks with contacts at the Army War College, at Headquarters Marine Corps, and I've made it absolutely clear in both cases that it is 100% certain that 9/11 was a Mossad operation, period. They did 9/11. They did it.
One of the clues to Israel's involvement in the 9/11 attacks is the behavior of a group of individuals known as the Dancing Israelis. They were seen by various witnesses standing on the roof of a van bearing the Urban Moving Systems logo and parked in Jersey City. They were rejoicing and taking pictures of themselves just as the first plane hit the North Tower.
And I could see that they were like happy, they didn't look shocked to me.
According to ABC's 2020, when the van belonging to the cheering Israelis was stopped by the police, the driver of the van, Savan Kurtzberg, told the officers,
"We are Israelis. We are not your problem. Your problems are our problems. The Palestinians are your problem."
Why did he feel that the Palestinians were a problem for the NYPD?
The 5 dancing Israelis were held for a total of 71 days in a Brooklyn jail before being quietly returned to Israel on the inconsequential charge of visa violation. 3 of them were later invited to an Israeli TV show in November 2001, where one of them stated, "Our purpose was to document the event."
Our purpose was to document the event.
Which implies prior knowledge of the event.
And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. The FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge.
Here's what the Jerusalem Post reported on 12 September 2001. Authorities suspect the terrorists intended to blow up the main crossing between New Jersey and New York. At least 2 of the detained Israelis were agents working for the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. and that Urban Moving Systems, the ostensible employer of the 5 Israelis, was a front operation. This was confirmed by 2 former CIA officers, and they noted that movers vans are a common intelligence cover.
The 5 dancing Israelis are just the tip of a vast iceberg. In September 2001, federal law enforcement was busy dismantling the largest Israeli spy ring ever discovered on American soil.
Since September 11th, more than 60 Israelis have been arrested or detained, either under the new Patriot anti-terrorism law or for immigration violations. A handful of active Israeli military were among those detained, according to investigators, who say some of the detainees also failed polygraph questions when asked about alleged surveillance activities against and in the United States.
None of these leads were thoroughly investigated. The reason is that in 2001, the head of the Justice Department's criminal division was Michael Chertoff, the son of a rabbi and a Mossad agent. All Israeli spies arrested by the FBI, including the dancing Israelis, owe him their impunity and repatriation to Israel. Chertoff is a key man in the 9/11 operation.
Quote, there was no question but that the order to close down the investigation came from the White House. It was immediately assumed at CIA headquarters that this basically was going to be a cover-up so that the Israelis would not be implicated in any way in 9/11.
9/11 was a policy coup that brought us a global war on terror and a series of disastrous wars across the region.
What happened in 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it, and we had instead a policy coup in this country, a coup, a policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us.
They call it the Long War. The War on Terror is a suitable title because the War on Terror is the longest and most expensive foreign war in U.S. history.
Turning 9/11 into an excuse for Israel to use its U.S. battering ram to take out Israeli targets was a long-term plan.
As far back as 1990, when Netanyahu served as Israel's deputy foreign minister, he claimed Iraq had a nuclear program that was, quote, fast accelerating. In an interview on NBC News Today show in December 1990, Netanyahu warned of what he called Saddam Hussein's, quote, weapons of destruction.
The question is really, how do we ensure that these weapons of destruction, these missiles, these chemical weapons, the nuclear program that is fast accelerating in Iraq, that these do not pose a threat? This is an issue for the entire international community.
Netanyahu's weapons of mass destruction lies were even more extreme a decade later.
There is no question whatsoever that Saddam is seeking and is working and is advancing towards the development of nuclear weapons. No question whatsoever.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
No one can seem to prove to this point that Iraq poses an imminent threat to this country or to any other nation.
Do you believe that action can be taken against Saddam only after he builds nuclear bombs and uses them?
The U.S. administration recently admitted, after months and months of talk, that there's no evidence of Iraq being tied to September 11th.
And do the various critics, especially overseas, believe that a clear connection between Saddam and September 11th must be established before we have a right to prevent the next September 11th? Well, I think not.
An Israeli think tank concocted the 2003 Iraq War all the way back in 1996. In a clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm, Israeli neoconservatives proposed both removing Saddam Hussein from power and weakening Syria. Clean break co-authors such as Richard Pearl and other Israel-loyal neocons such as Paul Wolfowitz and Elliot Abrams played leading roles in the Project for a New American Century. The think tank's Rebuilding America's Defenses white paper, published in September of 2000, called for a new Pearl Harbor as a casus belli for a series of U.S. wars, mostly on behalf of Israel. By way of deception, Israel and the Mossad did war with the new Pearl Harbor and executed a controlled demolition of American sanity.
The Zionist neocons had called for a new Pearl Harbor in order to effect the change they needed to see.
Israel-loyal neocon and clean break co-author Douglas Feith, who also served as the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense, was the architect of the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. Another Israel-loyal neocon and clean break co-author, David Wurmser, wrote a memo several days after 9/11 stating the U.S. should hit, quote, a non-Al-Qaeda target, such as Iraq, end quote. Many of the neocons hold dual U.S.-Israeli citizenship, and they are primarily loyal to Israel. Their project for a new American century was more accurately the project for a new Zionist century.
So what they needed is the United States military to come in and to basically fight their wars for them.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in and talk to me a second." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, "I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
The War on Terror is not just a name, it's authorization, it's a title, it's authorization and funding. And it was passed 3 days after 9/11 by the authorization to use military force, which basically gave the president the authority to wage war against anybody he thought was behind 9/11. So these are some of the places where the authorization to use military force has been invoked. Was Eritrea, was Somalia, were they involved in 9/11? Was Libya involved in 9/11? Are all these countries involved in 9/11? No, of course they're not. But the authorization to use military force based on 9/11 crime has opened up the Pandora's box for American open-ended war fighting across the Middle East, around the world actually. The fraudulent war on terror is based on the official myth of 9/11.
במיוחד היום עם אמריקה, אני יודע מה זה אמריקה. אין כזה דבר שאפשר להזיז אותו בקלות, להזיז לכיוון הנכון. לא יחמיאו לו. יש שווה, אז נניח שהם אומרים משהו. אז אמרו, 80% מהאמריקאים תומכים בה.
Quote, "I know what America is. America is something that can easily be moved to the right direction. They won't get in our way. 80% of Americans support us. It's absurd," end quote. Netanyahu, king of Israel. He didn't know he was being recorded. In the run-up to 9/11, Netanyahu had help preparing to move America from friends such as Larry Silverstein, a wealthy Zionist backer of the Israel Bonds program that supports Israeli apartheid and human rights abuses. Netanyahu and Silverstein were so close they spoke every Sunday afternoon.
I had the pleasure of working pretty much with every prime minister of Israel, from Yitzhak Shamir forward. I said to myself, wouldn't it be fantastic if I could own the Twin Towers? We got very, very lucky. The governor of New York, George Pataki, decided one day that maybe it would be good to privatize the ownership of the World Trade Center. So I got a call from the governor's office, and they said, would you ever consider owning the World Trade Center? It was very, very good for the family, very good for us, and we were very, very fortunate. On the morning of 9/11, I'm getting ready, getting dressed to go to the dermatologist. I have light-colored hair, light skin. The sun is a disaster for me. I can't take the sun. She said, okay, but you're going to the dermatologist, you're going this morning, and you're not going downtown. We got very, very lucky. And I had an obligation to collect the insurance proceeds from the policies. A new governor was just elected. Elliot Spitzer, an old friend who I knew well. And I said, Elliot, if you don't help me, I'll never collect from the insurance companies. And guess what? He listened, and he said, you know what? You're entitled. I'm gonna get you the money. And in 6 months, he got me the $4.5 billion. We got very, very lucky.
Here's Colin Powell at the UN spreading Israeli Mossad and CIA lies that tricked and scared large segments of U.S. and Western public opinion into supporting the illegal and immoral invasion of Iraq.
For example, they can produce anthrax and botulinum toxin. In fact, they can produce enough dry biological agent in a single month to kill thousands upon thousands of people. And dry agent of this type is the most lethal form for human beings. Iraq has mobile biological research laboratories in addition to the production facilities I mentioned earlier.
Who were the sources of Colin Powell's scary story about non-existent Iraqi weapons of mass destruction? One of them was criminal Zionist propagandist Judith Miller, who ginned up multiple stories claiming Iraq had WMDs for the New York Times. The New York Times is a dedicated Zionist propaganda vehicle well known for its unbroken track record of printing completely false and/or distorted information about Israel, Palestine, and the Middle East for decades to advance Israel's interests. A more accurate name for this publication would be the New US ZCIA Lies, or the New Zionist Lies. Judith Miller was deeply connected with Zionist neocon Louis Scooter Libby, who was both an attorney for Mossad agent Mark Rich and the chief of staff to Dick Cheney. Scooter Libby, who Slate magazine called the most significant intellectual influence behind the invasion of Iraq, also delivered to Colin Powell fraudulent reports claiming Iraq was an imminent threat to the U.S. and Saddam Hussein was linked to 9/11. In his memoir, Colin Powell castigated both Louis Libby's false reports about Iraq as well as the CIA for providing totally inaccurate information that Powell used in his UN presentation.
As the world knows, no weapons of mass destruction were ever found. There were none. If we had known there were no weapons of mass destruction, there would have been no war.
Now, what's going on here is that an Israeli plan known as the Yinon Plan, which was articulated in 1982, is being put into effect so that countries are being balkanized. That is, they're being broken up into ethnic statelets. You're causing friction between the various ethnic groups, breaking them up into ethnic statelets. That's the name of the game in Syria. That's what they did in Iraq. That's what's happened in Libya, etc. This is the Israeli plan to dominate the Middle East by breaking up the large Arab states and breaking up their armies and breaking the countries into pieces like Yugoslavia. There will be no competition for Israel, and Israel will have hegemony over in the entire region.
If you take out Saddam, Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region.
Oded Yinon's 1982 Zionist plan for the Middle East is in large part taking shape. Is this coincidence? Was Yinon a psychic? We in the West are victims of a long-held agenda, not of our making, and without a doubt, not in our interest. We're waging war for another entity, for another nation, for another interest that's not ours. And we're paying for it. Our sons and daughters are fighting it. And this is the partition of Palestine. When it happened in 1947, Menachem Begin rejected it.
We had several other people in the country, even among the Jews, the Zionists particularly, who were against anything that was to be done if they couldn't have the whole of Palestine and everything handed to them on a silver plate so they wouldn't have to do anything. It couldn't be done. We had to take it in small doses. You can't move 5 or 6 million people out of a country and fill it up with 5 or 6 million more and expect both sets of them to be pleased.
He said Jerusalem was and will forever be our capital. And Eretz Israel will be restored to the people of Israel. All of it and forever. This is to give you an idea what Eretz Israel means. It means the land of Israel. And according to people like Menachem Begin, it extends from the Nile River to the Euphrates. And this area right here is the Kurdish area, which happens to be occupied by the United States. This is all Syria right here. This is where the United States is occupying 1/3 of Syria. These are the various ethnic communities, religions, factions in Iraq and Syria. And from the Yinon plan, Yinon said the dissolution of Syria and Iraq is Israel's primary target on the Eastern Front. The dissolution of the military power of these states serves as the primary short-term target.
We had all sorts of objections to everything that was done. Something had to be done. We went ahead and done it and had it done, and now it's working out. Eventually, I think we'll have them all satisfied. But it's going to take a great deal of time yet to get the job done.
This is exactly what we did. When we went to Iraq, first in 1991 and then again in 2003, we destroyed the Iraqi military. If you remember, one of the first things that happened is that when we got into Iraq, we disbanded the entire military, sent everybody home, no more jobs, no entitlements, nothing. So the military went away. And in Syria, we've been trying to do the same thing for the last 7 years. Now, this is another break area here. Periwinkle is the area of the Kurds. And this area is where most of the oil is. And the United States and Israel are supporting the Kurdish independence. This area here in northern Iraq and this part of northern Syria. And in pursuing that, the largest holder of the reserves in this Kurdistan area of Iraq is a company called Janel Energy, which is a Rothschild company. So they're going after the strategic assets. And these two cities, Mosul and Raqqa, were targets of the American anti-terrorist attacks last summer, which destroyed those cities, destroyed them. Here's Mosul in June of 2017, the great mosque of Al-Nuri, destroyed in the Battle of Mosul. The Americans, we put our artillery around the cities and just pounded them for months. And that has a price. Here's Syria, the other city in Raqqa, in Syria, October 2017. At least half the city is totally destroyed. We said we were fighting ISIS, but under the pretext of fighting ISIS, we destroyed the cities. ISIS is the target, and they put that target wherever they want, and then destroy everything around the target.
From the Jordan River to the Middle East, that's all ours. It was promised to us.
1 week before the, the World Center, World Trade Center, those two great edifices of tremendous architecture, they were destroyed, in such a way that nobody still understands what happened. How come they were brought down in such a massive way? 1 week before, one of the great rabbis in Israel, a Hasidic rabbi, an Admor, he came to visit with some people, some of his disciples in the car. They prayed mincha with minyan in front of everybody passing in Manhattan. Where? Right there, near the World Center. After he finished the davening, the prayer, he said, say bye-bye to those buildings because you are not going to see them no more. It's unbelievable. There will be two big buildings in the land of Edom, which today we relate the word Edom to America. And those are the biggest, the tallest buildings in the world. And they will be brought down completely. And that will be the sign of the beginning of tremendous wars that will end only in the coming of the Mashiach. He said, say bye-bye to those buildings because you are not going to see them no more. It's unbelievable.
הצלחה בבעיה. אבל אני צריך מגזר. ברכה והצלחה. תפלאי ולתשיר. באתי לבקש את זה. בכל העניינים. גם הלאומיים. בזמן שישראל לאחרונה ניתצו כמה עניינים. פתחו כמה. מה שרואה עוד, וגם מצו שעדיין משאיר ליבו. אז הייתה משהו ומה ידיעתו.
ועושים.
הכנראה שהיא מספיק, שהיום כבר כמה שעות בגיל עדיין ליבו. אבל יש עוד כמה שעות, אבל יש להשתדל גם היום, ובשורות טובות. יש שמחה וטוב לבו. כדי שחסידים מקפידים שכל עניינים יהיו כשמחה. בשורות טובות, הצלחה רבה.
I hear the voices, and I read the front page, and I know the speculation, but I'm the decider, and I decide what is best. The decision of one man to launch a wholly unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq.
Biden just reclassified the Kennedy documents 60 years after his assassination. Why in the world would we be continuing to hide the truth about the Kennedy assassination 60 years later? And of course, the answer is obvious, because it implicates not individuals, but institutions, and reveals them as complicit in a murder and in the overthrow of the U.S. government. And the U.S. government is complicit in the overthrow of the U.S. government. And that's the truth. I know that for a fact, because I interviewed someone who saw the documents.
We spoke to someone who had access to these still hidden CIA documents, a person who was deeply familiar with what they contain. We asked this person directly, did the CIA have a hand in the murder of John F. Kennedy, an American president? And here's the reply we received verbatim. Quote, the answer is yes. I believe they were involved. It's a whole different country from what we thought it was. It's all fake.
Secrecy is incompatible with democracy. That's not democracy. It's something else. And don't insult me by calling it a democracy, because it's very much not. In the United States, we have over 1 billion federal documents that remain classified. 1 billion. So that's a democracy? That is not a democracy.
In JFK's famous speech warning about the nefarious power of secret societies, Kennedy likely gave us a coded warning about Israel's ultimate goal of global domination. He must have known about this plan because prior to becoming president, JFK had multiple private meetings with Benjamin Friedman, a former Zionist Jew who became Christian and attempted to warn members of the government about the ultimate Zionist ambition.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. Today, no war has been declared. And however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger. And yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired.
The Mossad's Sayanim, or covert Zionist helper agents, constitutes exactly the kind of secret society JFK warned against. Every word of his speech applies to the Mossad Sayanim.
The Sayanim are 10 of thousands of people, Jews, Zionists, who are members probably of the Bnei Brit, for instance. Bnei Brit is the Jewish Masonry, who occupy high level in all the societies. I mean, you can imagine 5,000 Sayanim in New York, only in the business area. 5,000 Sayanim in Los Angeles, in the production area, in the artistic area. And in France, in London, you can imagine 1,000 Sayanim in the medias. And they receive orders from the Mossad, from a department of the Mossad called the War Department. All these people who have their work, who work normally, they are citizens. I mean, they work in a bank, they are political, they are publishers. But when the Mossad call them and tell them, look, I need information. I need, for instance, I need that all the Zionim all over the world say that this person, for instance, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has said something anti-Semitic. And you see all over the world, in Europe, in New York, the medias, you have the impression, I mean, when I discovered that, I understood, because suddenly you open a newspaper, you listen to a radio, you hear a politician, everybody says, the Secretary General of the United States said something anti-Semitic. I mean, the poor guy. And why? Because the Mossad gave the order to do that.
If anything, Cohen understates the power of the Mossad Sayanim. Some of them are assassins who obviously have been tasked in the past with eliminating those who expose Zionist crimes. The Sayanim appear to be a precise implementation of the protocols of the elders of Zion in order to, quote, place our agents and helpers everywhere, end quote, to advance the Jewish Zionist conquest of the world that David Ben-Gurion referenced in Look magazine. Journalist Christopher Berlin has stated his belief that the protocols of the elders of Zion are likely meeting notes from a B'nai B'rith chapter. Everyone alive today should read the protocols of the elders of Zion, given that the Zionist Israeli Jewish conquest of the world, which is now entering its endgame, seems to fit that document accurately. Another protocol the Zionist movement has used very effectively in its quest to dominate the world is blackmail. Epstein Island was a Mossad blackmail operation, and recently it was reported that the Mossad blackmailed Bill Clinton using Monica Lewinsky.
We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
Within the U.S. government, there are forces wholly beyond democratic control. These forces are more powerful than the elected officials that supposedly oversee them. These forces can affect election outcomes. They can even hide their complicity in the murder of an American president. In other words, they can do pretty much anything they want. They constitute a government within a government, mocking by their very existence the idea of democracy.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
In my last conversation with President Trump in the White House, he called me a lot. And this is after January 6th, so it's 2 weeks before, or a week before he's leaving office. I said, how you doing? He said, not too well. And he went off into a tangent about what he thought happened with the election. I said, you made a promise to the public many times and to me privately that you haven't kept. What? I'll take care of it right now. I said, you promised you would release the records of the JFK assassination. He said to me, Judge, if they showed you what they showed me, you wouldn't have released it either. And I said, who's they and what did they show you? And then he said, Judge, someday when we're on the phone, and then he raised his voice, and there aren't 15 people listening to the phone call, back to a normal voice, I'll tell you.
Oh my God.
I mean, this makes it sound even worse. Who are they? Probably somebody in the intelligence community. What did they show him? JFK's brains blown out?
The actual reason the CIA has insisted every puppet president illegally withhold the full JFK assassination files is if our criminal Zionist regime ever disclosed the truth that Israel and the CIA killed JFK, the entire US ZCIA regime and its relationship with genocidal Israel would be completely delegitimized. The public would demand the declassification of all 1 billion classified documents held by the illegitimate US ZCIA regime, which would obviously reveal decades of atrocious crimes.
This is it. It was said by one person that after the Kennedy assassination, there has been no president. They have only been factotums of the system since then.
Factotum, a handyman or servant employed to do all kinds of work around the house. An employee or official having many different responsibilities.
And it may well be the most decisive event in modern American history.
Jeffrey Sachs is correct. We have had no legitimate president since November 22nd, 1963. All have been servants of Israel and the CIA. If any tried to exercise meaningful independent judgment, as Jimmy Carter attempted, the cabal removed them from office. Virtually every election has been a choice between one Zionist puppet such as Biden and another Zionist puppet such as Trump. Israel has the ability to buy elections outright or even rig the elections in collaboration with the CIA. As Monica Wiesack wrote in her book, JFK was America's last president.
Incidentally, I had dinner with Mike Pompeo, 3 weeks ago, and he said something really interesting to me.
Wait, you had dinner with Mike Pompeo 3 weeks ago?
He turned to me and looked me dead in the eye, and he said the entire upper echelon of that agency is made up of individuals who do not believe in the democratic institutions of the United States of America. That's a quote.
But so it was Mike Pompeo who convinced Trump not to release the file. And it was a guy who worked for Mike Pompeo texted me the day after I revealed that those files showed CIA complicity in your uncle's death, which they do, because I talked to someone who read them. And I said that on Fox News, and I got a text from a guy who works for Mike Pompeo informing me that I had just broken federal law, and that anyone who had told me that was a felon because we had revealed classified information. And I said, wait a second, that classified information suggests the U.S. government was involved in the murder of an American president. Yeah, that's Mike Pompeo's position on that.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit weird for him to say. And he was also behind convincing Trump not to pardon Assange.
Actually, Mike Pompeo plotted to assassinate journalist and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
Yeah, well, that confirms my earlier assessment of Mike Pompeo.
Makes me wonder, are we just a shell company for Israel? Just a shell company for Israel? Just a shell company for Israel?
Israel is not a colony of America whose leaders serve at the pleasure of the party in power in Washington.
In reality, the opposite is true. U.S. puppet politicians serve at the pleasure of Israel and the CIA, which is mostly a Mossad field station. How powerful is AIPAC, the Israeli lobby that fervently supports Israel's genocidal goals and dictates U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East? In an interview with Jeffrey Goldberg, the Zionist propagandist-in-chief of The Atlantic, former AIPAC official and Israeli super spy Stephen Rosen made it crystal clear who actually runs the U.S. government.
My name is Steve Rosen. For 2.5 decades, I was a senior official of AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee.
Rosen said, "You see this napkin? In 24 hours, we could have the signatures of 70 senators on this napkin."
If you went back to 1948 and you had two alternative futures, one with a state of Israel and one without a state of Israel, the United States, from a security point of view, would be much better off without Israel.
In point of fact, all aid to Israel is actually illegal. Senator Stuart Symington successfully sponsored and passed legislation in 1976 outlawing all military and economic aid to undeclared nuclear weapon powers such as Israel. At the behest of their AIPAC puppet masters, the U.S. Congress has ignored the Symington Amendment for nearly half a century and has pretended that Israel doesn't even have nuclear weapons. At the 1960 Democratic Convention, Symington was JFK's original choice to be vice president before Zionists muscled him out and used blackmail to replace him with their puppet LBJ, setting the stage for the 1963 Dallas coup. Christopher Berlin reports that Chicago's Zionist political machine chieftain, Jacob Arvey, led the blackmail operation to put LBJ onto the ticket, and in so doing, Zionists took advantage of JFK as a Trojan horse to get LBJ into the White House. If JFK and RFK had succeeded in forcing AIPAC to register as the agent of a foreign government, which it obviously is, the U.S. might today be an independent country and not a Zionist colony of Israel.
If this capital crumbled to the ground, the one thing that would remain is our commitment to our aid, and I don't even call it aid, our cooperation with Israel.
I think that by now it is very clear to many of us, including the Israeli leadership, that Washington is Israel's most subservient colony.
We live in an occupied government right now. We live in a government that's occupied, our nation's occupied, and trying to work within this occupied government for 9/11 truth when the whole deck is stacked against you is very difficult.
Israel is no ally. Also, it is actually not a friend. If the United States goes to war with Iran, it will not be because Tehran actually threatens America. It will be because Israel and its powerful lobby in the U.S. have succeeded in creating an essentially false casus belli to mandate such action. Israel interferes in American elections. It has corrupted our Congress. Its head of government publicly rebukes our own head of state. Its intelligence officers actually provide alarmist and inaccurate private briefings for American senators on Capitol Hill. One other very good reason why Israel should not receive billions of dollars in military assistance annually is its persistent espionage against the United States. Friends of Israel stole enriched uranium from a Pennsylvania refinery to create a nuclear arsenal. Arnon Milchan, a Hollywood producer born in Israel, arranged for the illegal purchase of 800 nuclear triggers.
Israeli arms dealer, super spy, and nuclear weapons trigger smuggler Arnon Milchan was the executive producer and chief financier of Oliver Stone's JFK film, which made no mention of Israel's nuclear weapons program and did not examine Israel's multiple motivations to remove JFK and replace him with Zionist loyalist LBJ. From Israel's perspective, solely blaming the CIA and the U.S. military establishment for the assassination of JFK is a convenient half-truth that shields Israel from scrutiny.
Someday, somewhere, someone may find out the damn truth. We better.
Israeli super spy Arnon Milchan also produced 3 Hollywood productions that foreshadowed Operation 9/11. The Medusa Touch in 1976, which featured an airplane crashing into a skyscraper, Fight Club in 1999, with multiple controlled demolitions of financial district skyscrapers, and the pilot episode of The Lone Gunman, first aired March 4, 2001, in which hijackers attempt to fly an airplane into the World Trade Center using remote-controlled autopilot.
Israel, which relies on Washington for political cover in international fora like the UN, does not spy discreetly, largely because it knows that few in Washington will seek to hold it to account. There were, for example, no consequences for the Israelis when Israeli Mossad intelligence officers, using passports and pretending to be Americans, recruited terrorists to carry out attacks inside Iran. Israelis using U.S. passports in that fashion put every American traveler at risk. Israel has obtained significant advantage by systematically stealing American technology with both military and civilian applications. The U.S.-developed technology is then reverse engineered and used by the Israelis to support their own exports. A General Accounting Office examination of espionage directed against American defense and security industries described how Israeli citizens residing in the U.S. had stolen sensitive technology to manufacture artillery gun tubes, obtained classified plans for reconnaissance systems, and passed sensitive aerospace designs to unauthorized users. The GAO concluded that Israel conducts the most aggressive espionage operation against the United States of any U.S. ally. FBI counterintelligence officer John Cole has reported how many cases of Israeli espionage are dropped under orders from the Justice Department. He provides a conservative estimate of 125 viable investigations into Israeli espionage involving both American citizens and Israelis that were stopped due to political pressure. So the answer to the question, is Israel an ally of the United States, is most definitely no. Is it even a friend? If you judge Israel by its record on how it interacts with the American government and people, I think the answer would also have to be no.
On November 22, 2012, the 49th anniversary of Israel and the CIA assassinating JFK and lying about it, the U.S. Army committed open treason in Israel.
"9/11 has led directly to 60,000 Americans dead and wounded."
According to an FBI report, an Israeli employee of Urban Moving Systems, one of the many Mossad front companies involved in Operation 9/11, stated, quote, "Give us 20 years and we'll take over your media and destroy your country," end quote.